Black people, it is time you realized we have created great civilizations in the past throughout Mother Africa, from the extreme northeast, so-called Middle East, to her southern extreme shores. However, all of these civilizations were destroyed by the so-called Indo-Europeans or Gentiles, the Romans, the Arabs, and other people. But we have tried to rise to the glory of our ancient heights continuously since then, because we are a people who don't give up easily. By that I mean, no matter how dismal our prospects seem, we are a people who believe and know how to hold on until a better day, as can be noted in the rise of our later civilizations in West and Northwest Africa. These civilizations, however, were destroyed by Arabs and Muslims. Let me quote something from you by a minister by the name of Reverend Robert Taylor in his book, The Diegesis, and I quote, "The first incursion of the forces of Islam into Africa was in 640 AD, when General Amru led an army into Egypt. The Saracen conquest was assisted by Alexandrine Christians who were enemies of the Byzantine tyrant. These heretical Christians paid tribute to the Caliph, repaired roads and bridges, and supplied provisions to the invaders. After a siege of 14 months, Alexandria surrendered to Amru in 642. In a message to Caliph Omar, Amru spoke highly of Alexandria and its 4,000 palaces, 4,000 baths, 400 theaters, 1,200 food markets, and 40,000 tributary Jews. After capturing Alexandria, the Saracens set out to conquer North Africa. Starting from Memphis with an army of 40,000, General Abdullah proceeded to besiege Tripoli, but the outbreak of an epidemic in his army compelled a retreat back to Egypt. 20 years later, North Africa was overrun when General Akbar led an army from the Nile River to the Atlantic Oceans. That's page 127 from a book entitled The Diegesis by Reverend Robert Taylor. The first of these West African civilizations was the Kingdom of Ghana from 300 AD to 1300 AD, approximately 1,000 years. Beginning in approximately 1040 AD, the Muslims began in earnest to convert the Africans to the Islamic faith. The Berbers and the pure Africans formed the Almoravids from the efforts of Arab evangelism. Their leader was a pure black who went by the name of Yusuf. And I quote also from W.E.B. Du Bois in his book, The World of Africa, page 204, and I quote, "By the middle of the 11th century, Ghana was the principal kingdom in the Western Sudan. Already the town had a native and a Muslim quarter and was built of wood and stone with surrounding gardens. The king had an army of 200,000. The wealth of the country was great. A century later, the king had become Mohammedan in faith," unquote. In 1076 AD, the Muslim Abu Bakr conquered Ghana. King Tinkermenin paid tribute to the Arabs and was allowed to stay in power in the meantime, however. And I quote, "The Almoravids converted numbers of Sudanese Negroes but gained no political control over them. They tried to subdue the kings of Ghana in 1051. Halagos was taken and pillaged. Some of the Negroids migrated south. Others, attracted by the new religion, joined the Almoravids. Among the converts was the king of the Mandingos. A number of such kings and chieftains were converted, but the mass of the people changed their religion slowly," unquote. That's taken from W.E. Du Bois, The World in Africa, page 205. However, it was primarily the Africa's conversion to Islam and Allah that really paved the way for Arab invasions into their minds and hearts and allowed for the Arab conquering of Africa south of the Sahara. Africans exchanged their history for the history of the Arab invaders by adopting their religion. However, it must be admitted they had only three choices offered to them by the zealous, profit-motivated Arabs. 1. conversion, 2, death, and 3, enslavement. So I don't run the risk of being labeled unfair and biased toward Arabs. I shall allow a native of Egypt who happens to be an Egyptologist to speak, and I quote, "The Muslim Arabs brought not only Middle Eastern Mediterranean goods, but also the religion of Islam and a greedy hunger for wealth through abduction and trading of black slaves," unquote, as taken from an author by the name of Mustafa Galala in his book Exiled Egyptians, page 176. Now remember, greed mixed with religious zeal can easily motivate a person to elevate his actions to include murder to satisfy his hunger for accomplishment. A hunger being satisfied such as greed, combined with doing the will of Allah, was the primary motivation for Arab conquest of North Africa. Let us listen to what the same author says here, and I quote, "The Islamic doctrine calls on Muslims to spread Islam even by force if necessary. As a result, many Muslims with a superior arm can force his religion by killing others. The unarmed people have no choice but to convert to Islam or die. This self-righteous Muslim may choose instead to enslave any and all members of a non-Muslim family. Spreading Islam by all means is not an option but a duty required by the Islamic doctrine. There are also sanctions for pursuing the jihad, a holy war, against those who had not been converted. Those who die in battle against non-Muslims would die in a holy cause," unquote, as taken from Exiled Egyptians, page 177. Now this is the kind of fanaticism that Africans were assaulted with during the encroachment of Muslim Arabs and their attacks on the African motherland. Now the Empire of Mali was in existence from 1213 AD to 1464 AD and was the empire of the people of Mali. This kingdom conquered the Songai and ruled them for approximately 50 years. The empire of Songai lasted from 1464 to 1498 AD. This was the greatest civilization Africa had produced since the fall of Egypt. Our granddaddy of black scholars, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, advises us that the Songai kingdom began to, and I quote, "expand rapidly, first westward, where it absorbed the Palestine and the remains of Ghana. Then it turned south and drove the people of the Maasai and the city-states of the coast, beyond the Kong Mountains. Under the victorious Sani Ali, the Songai began to expand east toward the Nile Valley," unquote. That's from The World of Africa by W.E.B. Du Bois, page 210 to 211. Now this was the last great empire of Africans. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois advises us that the Berbers and the Arabs of the Islamic persuasion overran and destroyed this great empire, and I quote, "The Turks seized the Eastern Roman Empire and in the west drove Arab and Berber from the coast down into Africa below the barrier of desert and sand. Armed with gunpowder, these fugitives fell upon the Songai and destroyed their state and culture at Tinkadibu in 1591, unquote." That's from page 212 of The World and Africa. Now as you see, the Hyksos, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, and other so-called Indo-Europeans or their descendants have been engaged in a war of control and destruction of our civilizations from at least 1700 BC to the present. The Arabs captured Egypt in 638 and they spread throughout North Africa. They appointed Musa Noseya as governor of Africa in 698. It is important to note it was the Arab Muslims who began the capturing, importing, and selling of Africans into slavery. They were the ones who paved the way for the European Christians to come in and continue the slave trade and take it to another level. After the destruction of our last strongholds, the kingdoms of West Africa, the Europeans and others enslaved our people, the original people of the Exodus, and shipped them all over the world. African Americans are largely descendants of the original black children of Israel. The original so-called Jews were black African people who were ruthlessly persecuted by the Romans in their attack on Jerusalem during the so-called Roman-Jewish wars. They left Jerusalem and migrated south of the Sahara as their ancestors had done 1,400 years earlier in the Exodus. Now, Ella Hughley, a sister who wrote a book entitled The Truth About the Black Hebrew Israelites. I like to quote from her page 127 in which she says, many of the Israelites who managed to escape their persecutors during the Roman-Jewish War subsequently migrated to West Africa, and 1,600 years later their descendants were captured and brought to America in chains by cruel slave traders. Unquote. The Christian Savior, Jesus Christ, was a black Israelite who was born during this time. The Roman-Jewish War in AD 66 was the peak of this persecution and the end of the original black Hebrew Israelites as a nation. As predicted by Jesus in this war, Jerusalem was overthrown, the temple was destroyed, and the black Israelites were scattered again. See Matthew, the 24th chapter, the 15th to the 21st verse, and Luke, the 21st chapter, 5th and 6th verse, and the 20th through the 21st, 4th verse rather. It was the Christians, however, who instigated and conducted the infamous Atlantic slave trade. Black people, wake up. Let's get our act together. Let's realize who our enemies have been from the ancient times to the present time. It has been the Gentiles, the people from the north, the Romans, the Arabs, and later the Edomites and Khazars. Black folks, let's get our act together.